The napkin landed near my glass before I even saw her hand move. One word, pressed hard enough to tear the paper. Help. I didn't look at her right away. 12 years of watching rooms for a living had taught me that the fastest way to blow a moment is to react to it. So I finished lifting my water glass, set it down slow, and only then let my eyes drift toward table 3, where the youngest billionaire in the country sat perfectly still, smiling for no one. Her name was Ava Castellan, and by midnight she was supposed to sign away control of a company her grandfather built. I was only at table 15 because someone had hired me to watch the room, not the woman in it. That changed the second I read 4 letters written in lipstick on cheap linen. I folded the napkin into my palm, and for the first time all evening, I stopped watching the exits and started watching her. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I am not a bodyguard, and I have never carried a weapon on a job in my life. I'm a security consultant, which mostly means companies pay me to sit in expensive rooms and notice things their own people are too busy to see. At 58, I've built a reputation on being forgettable. Nobody remembers the gray-haired man at table 15. That was the whole point of hiring me for tonight. The museum had rented out its private East Wing for the announcement of the Castellan-Holloway acquisition, a deal worth more money than I'll see in 3 lifetimes. String lights hung between marble columns. Waiters moved between 40 round tables with trays of champagne. Nobody at my table could afford to drink casually. I'd taken this job because it paid well and asked little of me. Watch the perimeter. Flag anything strange. Go home to my daughter by 1 in the morning. Simone was 17 and had stopped needing me to tuck her in years ago, but she still texted when I worked late nights, asking if I'd eaten. I'd promised her mother, before the accident took her, that I'd never let this job swallow me the way it swallowed men I used to work beside. Stay outside the glass, I used to tell myself. Watch the powerful people. Never become one of their problems. That napkin was about to break a promise I'd kept for 11 years. I watched Ava Castellan set down her fork with too much precision, the way people move when every motion is being observed and they know it. Across from her sat Preston Ling, her executive strategy director, 46 years old, smiling like a man reading from a script he'd memorized weeks ago. Beside him, the museum's operations director checked his watch twice in 90 seconds. Small things. The kind of things nobody at a $200 a plate dinner is supposed to notice. Then Ava Castellan rose from her chair and started walking, alone, toward a private gallery roped off for the evening's centerpiece exhibit. 6 waiters shifted their positions the instant she stood, adjusting angles like dancers hitting invisible marks. A curator I recognized from earlier, 61 years old, name tag reading Julian Ashford, straightened a single painting frame that hadn't needed straightening. My pulse didn't race. It slowed. That's what happens to me when something is wrong. Everything gets quiet and clear. I stood and crossed the room before I decided to. I reached her 3 steps from the gallery entrance, close enough to speak without anyone else hearing. "Don't move," I said, "and don't say a word." She turned toward me like I'd lost my mind, the same look every powerful person gives a stranger who dares to interrupt them. Then, her eyes followed mine, past her shoulder, into the gallery she was about to enter, and she saw it. "Look at the room," I told her quietly. "Not at me." Her jaw tightened, but she obeyed, scanning the space the way I taught myself to scan rooms years ago, cataloging without judging first. 6 people stood inside that gallery, positioned near a glass case containing documents from the acquisition. Nothing about any single person looked staged. Together they formed a shape, a funnel aimed directly at the spot where she would naturally stand to read what waited inside that case. "I don't understand what I'm looking at," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "You're not supposed to," I said. "That's the point. Someone built this room so you'd walk in, see something specific, and react to it exactly the way they need you to react. If you walk In there now, you become a witness confirming whatever story they've decided to tell about you tonight. She stared at me another long moment, calculating whether I was insane or dangerous or somehow telling the truth. Then something in her expression shifted, the practiced calm of a CEO cracking just slightly at the edges. "The napkin," she breathed. "You read it." "I read it," I said. "Now tell me why a woman worth $11 billion needed a stranger at table 15. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped backward away from the gallery entrance, and the funnel of bodies inside shifted almost imperceptibly, recalibrating like a machine registering an error. I watched Preston Ling's head turn toward us, from across the room, his smile never wavering, his eyes doing all the actual work. "Because," she finally said, "I've spent 3 months feeling like I'm the only person in my own company who doesn't know what's actually happening." I let her move now that the moment had passed, walking her gently away from the gallery and toward a quieter corridor lined with sculpture. She asked the obvious question the second we were alone. "How did you know?" "Nothing in there looked wrong. I've walked into 100 rooms like that one." I didn't answer yet. Some questions deserve to wait until there's enough truth gathered to make the answer mean something instead of sounding like a magic trick. "What's actually inside that gallery?" I asked instead, "that you were supposed to see tonight?" She exhaled, glancing back toward the roped-off entrance. "Internal audit documents. Files proving Holloway Industries falsified environmental compliance reports for years before we started acquisition talks. If I sign tonight, I'm supposedly protecting my company from being legally tied to their liability." Preston's been building toward this presentation for 6 weeks. "Everyone on my board thinks it's the deal of the decade." She paused. "I was going to sign the transfer papers after the exhibit, tonight, in front of cameras. Then let's go look," I said together this time, and slow. We walked back in, and this time nothing shifted around us, because the shape those 6 bodies had formed was designed for a woman walking in, alone, unguarded, primed to feel the weight of discovery hit her exactly once, hard in front of witnesses who would later swear to her genuine, spontaneous reaction. With me beside her, the choreography had nowhere left to go. Inside the case sat photographs, financial statements, a handwritten memo bearing Holloway's founder's signature. Everything looked authentic because it was authentic. That's what made my stomach tighten. I've spent my career learning that the most convincing lies are built almost entirely from true things, arranged in an order that makes them mean something they don't actually mean. "This isn't fabricated," I told her. "That's not the problem. The problem is what's missing." She studied me, the confusion in her expression giving way to something sharper. "You keep talking like you've seen this exact thing before." "Not exact," I said, "but close enough to recognize the shape of it." I wasn't ready to say more, not yet, not until I understood how deep this went. Some truths are dangerous to hand someone before they're braced to carry them. Ava Castellan had already lost her footing once tonight. I wasn't going to be the reason she lost it twice before midnight. While she stood there absorbing that, an older man stepped quietly out of the shadows near the far wall. It was Julian Ashford, the curator I'd noticed straightening a frame that didn't need straightening. He'd worked with this private collection for over 2 decades, and something in his posture told me he'd been waiting, patiently, for someone to finally ask him the right question instead of walking past him the way everyone else had all evening. "You're wondering why the Baldwin painting is hanging 4 inches lower than it was this afternoon," he said, addressing me directly, not Ava, as though he'd already decided which of us would actually understand what he was about to say. I hadn't noticed the painting at all, only the people. That unsettled me more than anything else that night. "It was moved," he continued, "to change the angle of the overhead light, so the glass case would catch a glare at exactly the wrong moment if anyone tried to photograph what's inside it clearly." Ava turned toward him, startled. "Why would that matter?" Julian folded his hands behind his back, The calm of a man who'd spent his life around valuable things and learned to speak carefully about them. Because someone wanted tonight's reaction remembered. Ms. Castellan, not documented. A blurred photograph and a clear memory of your face are worth far more to certain people than a clean image anyone could later dispute in a courtroom. I filed that detail away like a piece of a lock finally turning. Ava thanked him quietly, and he lingered a moment longer, glancing between us as though weighing whether to say more. I've worked 5 acquisitions in this building, he finally added. I've never seen a layout change twice in one afternoon. Whoever did, it wanted the room to feel effortless. Effortless takes far more planning than people assume. Then he stepped back into the shadows he'd come from, leaving us with one more thread pulling at the shape of the evening. We found a private study off the east wing, borrowed without permission, and spread out everything we could gather from the gallery on a long table. Ava moved through it methodically, the CEO instinct returning now that the shock had passed. There's a gap, she said after 20 minutes, tapping a financial timeline. 8 months missing between this audit and the one Preston presented tonight. Where's the interim report? That's your first real question, I told her. Ask it out loud to the wrong person, and you'll know exactly who's been controlling what you see. She looked up at me, understanding settling into her face like weather changing. For the first time all night, she wasn't performing composure for anyone. She was simply thinking, and I recognized the particular exhaustion of someone realizing they've been managed instead of informed. Preston Ling found us 20 minutes later, knocking softly before entering, his smile intact but his eyes moving fast across the papers on the table. Ava, the board's asking when you'll be ready to sign. The Holloway team is waiting. His voice carried perfect warmth. Too perfect, the kind rehearsed enough times that spontaneity had been sanded off it entirely. I stayed, quiet, watching how his gaze flicked toward me, cataloging whether I was a threat worth naming. I'm not signing tonight, Ava said. Preston's expression didn't crack, but something behind it recalculated. The board expected I know what the board expected, she interrupted. I'm telling you what's happening instead. He glanced at me again, longer this time. And who exactly is advising you on corporate strategy tonight, Eva? A man I don't recognize from any department in this building? He's not advising me on strategy, she said. He's the only person in this building who told me the truth without being asked twice. Preston left without another word, and I understood we just started a clock neither of us controlled anymore. Whoever built tonight's presentation wasn't going to sit quietly while their carefully constructed moment collapsed. I've learned that people who manipulate rooms for a living rarely handle losing control of one gracefully. You think it's him, Eva said once we were alone again. The obvious answer is usually the wrong one, I told her. He had access, motive, and opportunity, which makes him either guilty or exactly who someone wanted you looking at first. I'd learned that lesson somewhere I didn't like remembering. She caught the shift in my voice, immediately, the same way she'd caught the anomaly in the gallery once I'd pointed her toward it. You've seen this before, haven't you, she said. It wasn't really a question. I sat down across from her, and for the first time that night, I let myself answer honestly. Before I became a consultant, I worked corporate event operations for a firm that handled shareholder meetings and product launches. 26 years old, thought I understood how business worked. I watched a colleague get walked into a room, exactly like that gallery tonight, made to react to selectively arranged information in front of the wrong witnesses. His career ended 8 weeks later. I never forgot how it happened, because I never figured out how to stop it in time to help him. Ava was quiet for a long moment. Who designed it, back then? A man who understood, something most people never think about, I said. You don't need to lie to control someone. You just need to control which true things they see, and when and who's standing nearby when they react. I looked at her directly. Tonight, someone used that exact same architecture on you. That's not a coincidence I know how to explain yet. But I intend to. 26 years is a long time to carry something like that, she said quietly. I didn't answer right away, because she was right, and I'd never said it out loud to anyone, not even Simone's mother in the years before she got sick. You don't carry it every day, I finally told her. You carry it the way you carry a scar. You forget. It's there until something presses on it exactly the right way. Tonight pressed on it. She reached for her phone and pulled up the museum's event staff directory, scrolling until she found the name I half expected. The operations director tonight, she said slowly. Warren Cole. He requested this venue personally 3 weeks ago, overriding my communications team's original recommendation. I leaned forward. Ask your assistant who approved the change in gallery layout this afternoon. Someone rearranged that room in the last few hours, not the last few weeks. We found Warren Cole near the coat check, still checking his watch, still moving with the practiced calm of a man who'd spent decades making sure events ran without a single visible seam. When Ava asked him directly who'd authorized the layout change, he didn't lie, but he didn't volunteer anything either. A request came through this morning with proper credentials attached, he said carefully. I assumed it came from your office. I had no reason to question it. I believed him. He looked like a man who'd been used, not a man who'd built the trap himself. Ava made the deeper call herself, her voice steady despite everything unraveling around her. The answer came back within minutes. The layout change had been requested that morning by someone with system access but no formal authority to request it, someone whose login credentials belonged to her communications advisor, a woman named Renata Sokolov, 37, sharp enough that I'd clocked her watching our conversation from across the ballroom twice already, tonight. Renata's been with me 4 years, Ava said, disbelief and calculation warring in her voice. She wouldn't. I didn't argue with her, because certainty built on loyalty is exactly the kind of certainty people exploit. Instead, I asked the question that mattered more. Who did she work for before joining your company? Ava didn't know offhand, but her assistant found the answer in under 10 minutes, and when she read it aloud, something cold settled into my chest. A boutique corporate communications firm, Ava read. Contracted for shareholder events at logistics and manufacturing companies throughout the Northeast. I asked for the firm's name, and when she gave it, I recognized it immediately, because it was the same firm that had employed the man who orchestrated the moment that ended my colleague's career 26 years ago. Not the same person, but the same methods taught, refined and passed down like inherited technique. That can't be a coincidence, Eva said. It isn't, I told her. Somebody learned that technique from somewhere, and it wasn't invented twice by accident. I didn't have proof yet, only a thread pulling tighter the longer we followed it. Ava sat back, absorbing the shape of what her trusted advisor might have been building around her for years, quietly, patiently, waiting for a moment worth exactly what tonight was worth. $11 billion and a signature made under manufactured certainty. My phone buzzed once, low against my jacket pocket, and I almost ignored it before I remembered who it would be. Simone, checking in the way she always did on late nights, asking if I'd eaten yet and reminding me she had an exam in the morning. I typed back a short reply, something steady and ordinary, and felt the strange gravity of standing between two entirely different worlds in the same evening, one where a girl needed her father home, and one where a woman needed someone willing to stay. We need proof, I said, setting the phone face down. Not suspicion. Something concrete enough that nobody can talk their way around it. Ava thought for a moment, then straightened with the particular energy of someone remembering she still ran a company. I can create a controlled leak. 3 slightly different versions of one confidential detail, given to 3 different people tonight. Whichever version resurfaces in tomorrow's internal briefing tells us exactly who's feeding information where. It was a good plan, simple and quiet, the kind of test that wouldn't alert anyone until it was already too late to Stop. Ava fed Preston one version of a fabricated compliance figure, Renata a second, and Warren Cole a third. Each one plausible, each one different by a single decimal point that would only matter to someone tracing its origin. Then we waited, and I walked the perimeter of the ballroom the way I should have been doing, all along. While we waited, Julian Ashford found me near the sculpture hall and told me one more thing he'd apparently been holding back. Ms. Sokolov asked me a strange question 3 weeks ago, he said, when she came to inspect the gallery for tonight's event. She wanted to know which paintings photographed poorly under gallery lighting. I thought she was being thorough. I didn't think she was planning a blind spot. I thanked him and understood we now had a witness who'd unknowingly watched the trap being built, piece by piece, weeks before anyone walked into it. The confirmation came just after 11, when Ava's assistant intercepted an internal memo circulating among the board's senior advisors, one already citing the exact figure she'd given only to Renata. Not Preston. Not Warren. Renata Sokolov had passed information forward within 90 minutes. Information nobody outside that small test should have known existed yet. Ava read the memo twice, her hand tightening around her phone until her knuckles went pale. She's been feeding Preston selectively edited reports for months, Ava said quietly, piecing it together in real time. Not fabricating anything, just choosing which true things reached him and which ones never did. I nodded, because that matched exactly what I'd suspected since the gallery. Preston hadn't necessarily lied to her. He'd likely believed his own presentation completely, built entirely from information someone else had curated for him with surgical precision. We confronted Renata together in the same private study, and to her credit, she didn't waste time denying what the evidence already proved. I never fabricated a single document, she said, her voice controlled even as her composure finally slipped. Everything Preston presented tonight was true, but not complete, Ava said. You decided what I was allowed to know, and when, so I'd sign before I understood the whole picture. Renata's jaw tightened. The acquisition needed to close before Holloway's stock dropped further. I was protecting the deal. You were protecting someone, I corrected quietly, but I don't think it was her. Renata's eyes flicked to me, and for just a moment, something like recognition passed across her face, the particular unease of someone realizing they'd been caught by exactly the kind of observer they'd been trained to avoid. The real objective, I said, turning to Ava, was never just closing this deal tonight. It was making sure you signed before an independent audit could ever catch what's actually missing from Holloway's compliance history. Once your signature was public, once cameras caught your reaction inside that gallery, you'd be politically and legally tied to a decision you never fully understood. Whoever benefits from Holloway's liabilities disappearing needed you to move fast, publicly and irreversibly. Ava's face went pale, then hardened into something I recognized. The particular stillness of a person deciding, finally and completely, not to be managed anymore. She didn't call security. She didn't have Renata escorted from the building in front of cameras, because she understood by then that public spectacle was exactly the tool that had been used against her all night. Instead, she quietly informed her board the acquisition was postponed pending independent review. The announcement went out just before midnight, brief, calm, giving no reporter anything dramatic enough to run with. Ava Castellane values complete information before major decisions, the statement read, and postponed acquisitions of this scale to ensure full transparency for shareholders. Nobody outside that private study ever knew how close she'd come to signing away accountability for a fraud she hadn't yet discovered, or how a stranger at table 15 had stopped her. I left the museum near 1 in the morning, exactly as I'd promised Simone, though the promise now felt smaller than the night that had swallowed it. My phone buzzed with her usual text asking if I'd eaten, and I realized I hadn't touched a single bite of the meal I'd been paid to sit quietly beside. I texted her back that I was on my way home, and for the first time in years, I meant it with something more complicated than routine relief. The following weeks moved quietly. An independent audit confirmed everything Julian Ashford, Ava, and I had pieced together in that borrowed study. Renata Sokolov resigned before she could be formally dismissed, and the firm she'd once worked for quietly severed ties with several of its remaining clients once word began circulating in rooms far above mine. Preston Ling kept his position, chastened but cleared, a man who trusted the wrong information and learned, painfully, what that costs a person in rooms like the ones he worked in. Warren Cole tightened his approval process afterward, refusing to let a single layout change through without his own signature attached, and told Ava privately that he never wanted to feel that useful to the wrong person again. 3 weeks later, Ava Castellan called and asked to meet, not at her offices, not at another gala, but at a small diner near my apartment where nobody would recognize either of us. She arrived without an assistant, without cameras, wearing clothes plain enough that I almost didn't recognize her walking through the door. She sat across from me, ordered coffee she didn't touch, and finally asked the question I'd known was coming since that hallway 3 weeks earlier. "When you told me not to move," she said, "what exactly did you see?" I thought about how to answer honestly instead of impressively. "Not danger," I said. "Not in the way you were afraid of. I saw a room built to make you feel one specific emotion at one specific moment, in front of people who'd later confirm you'd felt it genuinely. The physical arrangement wasn't the threat. The threat was the reaction they were counting on you having, and the signature that would follow it." She turned her coffee cup slowly on the table, considering that. My whole team missed it. Renata built her entire career reading rooms better than anyone I've ever worked with. How did a stranger at table 15 see something none of us could? Because you were all looking at what they wanted you to see, I said. I was watching what they wanted you to do. She sat with that for a long moment, and I watched something settle in her, quiet and permanent. The particular relief of someone finally understanding a truth they'd suspected but couldn't name. It wasn't triumph. It was simply clarity, the kind that comes slowly, after enough patient, unglamorous observation. "I've spent my entire career believing information was safety," she said eventually. "If I had better data than everyone else, I'd always make the right call." She looked at me directly. "You didn't give me better data that night. You gave me time to think before someone else decided what I was supposed to believe with it." I nodded, because that was in the end the only honest thing I'd actually done. Not detective work, not heroism, just 26 years of remembering how badly it hurts to watch someone get maneuvered into a moment they never chose and refusing, once, to let it happen again in front of me without saying something. Sometimes that's the entire difference between a tragedy and a Tuesday night that quietly corrects itself. Ava offered me a permanent position advising her company's internal security afterward, a generous one, the kind of offer that would have let me stop taking small, uncertain jobs entirely. I turned it down, gently, because staying outside rooms like that one had kept me steady for 11 years, and I wasn't ready to trade steadiness for comfort just because someone finally noticed the value in what I do quietly, without needing credit for it. "You could still say yes," she said, almost smiling, though I could tell she'd expected the answer before she asked. "I could," I agreed. "But then I'd stop being the man who notices the room and start being part of it. I've watched what that does to people. I'd rather keep my seat at table 15. She didn't argue. I think by then she understood exactly what I meant, better than most people ever would. "Then let me offer you something smaller," she said, sliding a card across the table with only a phone number written on it. No title, no company name, not a job. Just a promise that if something ever feels wrong, in a room I'm standing in, I'll have someone to call who won't tell me what I want to hear. I took the card because that offer cost her nothing to make and everything to mean, and I understood finally that trust built slowly is the only kind that ever holds. What I didn't turn down was her standing invitation to call. whenever something in a room felt wrong and she couldn't quite name why. 6 months later, she did exactly that. Once before, a much smaller decision that turned out to be nothing at all. Just her own instincts finally sharp enough to question a room on her own. I told her that was the real proof the lesson had taken. Not that she needed me. That she no longer had to. Simone asked about her once, months later, glancing up from her homework at the kitchen table. The napkin lady, she called her. The way a teenager files away a strange story her father won't fully explain. I told her only the part that mattered. That sometimes the most powerful person in a room is quietly asking for help, and the world moves so fast around them that almost nobody bothers to actually look. I still think about that napkin sometimes. 4 words pressed hard enough into cheap linen to tear it. Help. Not a scream. Not a scene. Just one honest request from someone who'd finally realized she couldn't trust her own certainty anymore. I've spent my whole career believing the safest place to stand is outside other people's power. That night taught me something quieter. Sometimes the only thing standing between someone and disaster is a stranger willing to notice and simply refuse to look away.